The 2025 Berlin Marathon overall was a fairly low-key event. There weren't any major stories, really. The biggest story probably is the weather. It was extremely hot and humid. When the men's and women's elite field took off around 9:15 in the morning, it was already about 21 degrees Celsius, which is about 69, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And when they finished about 2 hours and change later, it was almost 24 degrees Celsius, which is about 76 degrees Fahrenheit. And the humidity for the entire event was 70% or a little bit more. So that makes it extremely hot, extremely muggy, given that most elite marathoners prefer to race around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 10 degrees Celsius. And even then, if it's sunny, a lot of direct sun in that temperature, and it's humid, they still would like it cooler. So to be in the low to mid 20s Celsius or low 70s Fahrenheit, that's an extremely hot race. So congratulations to Sawe and Wanjiru for winning the men's and women's races. Again, I don't want to take anything away from the athletes because that's ultimately who's actually winning these races, but I talk about shoes on this channel, so let's get into the shoes. And starting with Adidas, because Adidas won both the men's and women's races and they kind of dominated this race, which you would expect given that Berlin is their home race. Essentially, they also kind of had a low-key promotional push going into this event. I expected to see some product launches, mainly this Adios trainer that we've been hearing about all year, though that has kind of died off a little bit. And I'm beginning to think that the upcoming Adidas Supernova Rise 3, which is a significant update, may be that shoe that people were talking about in the leaks as the Adios trainer. We'll see that. But regardless, we didn't see this shoe launched at Berlin. I expected a big launch of product for Adidas in Berlin. At most, what we got was probably the official launch of the Evo 2, even though that shoe's been out and kind of available depending on what market you're in for, I would say, the past 4, maybe even 6 months, depending on what region you're in. But now we saw really all Adidas channels promoting that shoe and really kind of launching that shoe. And with Sawe's victory in the Evo 2, I think this probably would be considered the big push for the Evo 2 release finally. And speaking of the Evo 2, if we check the World Athletics shoe checker, we can see that there's actually 4 Evos approved for racing right now. There's the Evo 1 and the Evo 1 V2. That's the one with the liquid rubber. Then the V2 is the one with the continental rubber that we see the elites racing that you and I can't buy. Then there's the Evo 2, and then there's an Evo 2 dev model. And that's actually quite important. As you can see, the photos that are in the shoe checker aren't really drastically different, but I do suspect there is a considerable difference between these two shoes. And what this means is that the Evo 2 is just the stock Evo 2, the one that you and I can buy, the one with the liquid rubber outsole, this one, the one that we've seen many times. But that Evo 2 Dev, that can be any number of things. Now, Sawe was definitely running in that Dev model. As you can see here, here's the bottom of his shoe. That's the Continental outsole. This isn't an Evo 2 V2, this is an Evo 2 Dev right now. But Adidas is going through, I think, a big tech shift right now. They're moving away from the energy rod system and they're moving into another system, something that we actually saw kind of sneakily previewed here with the Evo Prime X. See that little gray sort of ring? That's kind of Adidas's new plate or rods or whatever you want to call it. The athletes that were involved in the Chasing 100 thing that got the Evo Prime X, they were still calling it the rods, but now I'm seeing it called a new type of rod or rod 2.0 or even plate, and we've seen some other iterations of this. So they're moving forward. So that means the shoe that Sawe was racing in could have had this new sort of plate rod system that Adidas is playing with. I also know they have been testing carbon fiber plates in their shoes, which I think is a huge step. They really need to move away from those rods with these softer foams, especially in the Evos. I think they need a new system, and I think Adidas has really realized that. That's why they're playing with all these things. So I think that's also what we're seeing in that Evo 2 Dev model. So right now, Adidas has these 3 shoes in play at the elite level. The Evo 1, I would still say, is the most dominant shoe the Adidas elites are racing in. The Adios Pro 4 is one I haven't really seen on elites' feet until 2025 Berlin, where it finished first and second on the women's side. And then the Evo 2 is the one that's getting really shown off to the real key Adidas athletes, and they're getting that shoe. Interestingly too, all of Sawe's pacers that were wearing the Evo 2, they were wearing the Evo 2 standard version, the one with the liquid rubber outsole. Only Sawe was in the what I would call the Evo 2 dev model with the continental rubber outsole, and who knows what else inside that midsole. So again, a lot of complexities here for Adidas. I think they're going through a big shift, and I think starting next year, we're going to see some big changes for the Adios range at the super shoe end. Moving to Nike, overall, there wasn't a big Nike presence at this year's Berlin Marathon, which isn't totally out of the ordinary. Usually the big Nike presence in Berlin will be via NN Running, which is a Nike-supported team. And even when Kipchoge was going for the course record in his prime, there still wasn't a huge presence of Nike at this event. It's Adidas's home event. I think Nike's always been fairly respectful of that, though they have gotten some records at this event. But at this year's race, I didn't really see anything out of the ordinary, any Nike Elite that was actually there. We're just in stock Alphafly 3s. And if we take a look at the World Athletics shoe checker, you can actually see that there are actually no more Alphafly 3 dev models. That Dev 16 is now gone. There are some dev models on here, but they're all track specific, mostly throwing and field events. There's actually no marathon racing dev models. Now that doesn't mean that they can't show up. Stuff can show up on this shoe checker, any day basically. And we are moving now to Chicago, which will be the next World Major Marathon. And that's typically where we will see for the first time some prototypes from Nike and some new dev models. And this year, that may be the Alphafly 4. If we're going to see a release or that shoe actually start being raced, we're going to probably see it in a few weeks in Chicago. But interestingly, as of right now, there's nothing on the World Athletics shoe checker. But there was an interesting Nike-related event. The second place finisher in the men's race was a Japanese runner by the name of Akira Akasaki, who actually is a professional Ekiden runner. As you can see here, he was racing in his Team Ekiden kit. Now, Ekidens are a big deal in Japan. They're probably the biggest sporting event in Japan, and they're basically a set of relay races that happen around New Year's that are huge. They're long road events, relays, they're team events. They have a lot of corporate sponsors, a lot of corporate teams. It is a big deal. So Akasaki is a professional Ekiden runner, and if you look at his Instagram, you can see that he runs for the Kyuden Engineering Ekiden team. Again, one of the corporate teams. But what's interesting here is if you look further down, you'll see that the shoe sponsor for the Kyuden Engineering Ekiden team is actually New Balance. And if you scroll through his Instagram feed, you'll see him in a lot of New Balance shoes. But he finished the race, or ran the race and finished second place in this year's Berlin Marathon in a pair of Alphafly 3s, just a stock pair of the new Glacier Blue Alphafly 3 colorway. So that's not really a good look for New Balance. Now, to be fair, usually those sponsorships for the Ekiden teams are at the team level. And if a runner has other personal connections or personal sponsorships, generally they can race in their sponsored shoes. They need to wear the team kit, but they can run in whatever shoes they want for their sponsors. And if they don't have a sponsor, they're expected to run in the team's sponsored shoes. So he may be a Nike runner. He may have a connection with Nike from his collegiate days before he joined the corporate Ekiden system. I don't really know. Also, interestingly, on the podium ceremony for the medals for the event, he was there in his Ekiden warm-up kit, but wearing a pair of all-white Nike Pegasus Plus. And really wonderful shoe, but it was also really great to see. Now, the Peg Plus is very popular in Japan, so that was also not a huge surprise. But again, maybe not the best look for New Balance, but I don't think that sponsorship for New Balance is for him. I think it's for his team, and he's free to run in whatever he wants, especially outside of Japan. But he did race in his Ekiden team kit. So again, shows some of the complexities of Ekiden racing and corporate racing, stuff that you're not necessarily going to see in the West very often. Moving on to Asics, like Nike, Asics also doesn't typically have a huge presence in Berlin, though this year, I would say, looking across the men's and women's elite field, besides the Adidas runners, the ones you noticed next were really the Asics runners. There were a lot of them, especially in the men's field, and they were all in the Metaspeed Tokyo series. Majority of them were in the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo, and there were a few people in the Metaspeed Edge Tokyo. I didn't see any Metaspeed Rays in there. However, according to the World Athletics Shoe Checker, the Metaspeed Ray is fully legal now for World Athletics sanctioned road racing. And the Asics Metaspeed Ray being fully legal for World Athletics sanctioned road racing is kind of a big deal, because that means if an Asics Elite or Pro wants to race in that shoe now, they can. In fact, last week back in Tokyo in the men's marathon at the World Championships, we saw an Italian runner finish third wearing a pair of Metaspeed Rays. So he did very well in that shoe. But as of now, we've not seen really any other Pro or Elite from Asics race in the Ray or choose the Ray over the Sky or Edge Tokyo to race in. So that's actually quite telling about how they actually see that shoe. Since we're talking about the World Athletics Shoe Checker and Asics, if you scroll down a little bit further through all of their approved shoes, you actually see that they have 4 approved prototypes. Now, 2 of those prototypes are actually track spikes that we've seen for quite some time now. They're not really new, but the other 2, the Type A and the Type B, those are new, and here's what they look like. They're absolutely ridiculous looking shoes. Asics is definitely playing with ideas and innovation, and they're really testing a whole bunch of things out. Now, these shoes were not at Berlin, they were not raced at Berlin, they have nothing to do with Berlin, but I thought it would be interesting to mention this. Also, if you look at the silhouette and some of the geometry of these 2 new prototypes, they look a lot more like the Metaspeed Ray, especially in the heel and the upper, than they actually do the Metaspeed Sky or Edge Tokyo. So interesting where Asics development is actually headed. Now again, these shoes were not at Berlin, they're not relevant to Berlin, but I think I will be talking about these 2 shoes over the coming months, and they will become increasingly important because Asics obviously has a bunch of ideas and they're really trying to push forward. And I thought I'd end this on Puma because, like Adidas, Berlin is also Puma's home race. Now, Puma doesn't have a particularly strong presence at the world global elite level, but at the regional and national level in Europe, especially in Germany, they have a lot of top athletes. And Pfeiffer finished 8th place as the top German in the men's race in this year's Berlin Marathon in a pair of Fast R3s, which I think marks the best result, at least in the world majors, for the Fast R3. Though, about a week ago at the men's marathon in Tokyo, Petros finished 2nd in a pair of Fast R3s in that sprint finish that came down to 0.03 seconds at the line in the men's marathon, which I think marks actually the best result for the Fast R3. If I look into the women's elite field and the women's field in general, there are a lot more Fast R3s over there. So there was a presence in this race, and the Fast R3 is starting to kind of pick up. So it's good to see it in the top 10 and get some results this year. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, check out sagasurunning.com for merch or click the join button below. If neither one of those options are good for you, leave a comment or a like because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.